Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and coming up in just a few moments, we'll be talking to Jonathan Sandys. He's the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill, about his book, God and Churchill. We're making that connection as we speak. In the meantime, I want to remind you of a very special series that we're running on theDove TV on Tuesday nights at 8:30. It's called Life is Best, and it's a terrific series dealing with the subject of abortion. And it's produced by our good friend Todd Friel over at Wretched TV. We have a little bit of a trailer on that, so let's play that for you now.
I don't consider it a human being.
Yes, it's another human life, but it's their body.
It's not exactly something, but then again, it is something.
It's kind of more like a bunch of cells. To me, they're not alive, so like, I'm okay with it.
The child is not technically alive.
You should have the right to end a child's life if it needs to be.
It's only a potential human being. Abortion kills a potential human being.
Abortion is best defined as the intentional killing of a human fetus. And that's just not my perspective. That's what a lot of abortion choice advocates will say, or at least the more honest ones. For example, feminist Naomi Wolf calls abortion a real death. Now, it's true some feminists, like Kathy Pollitt, say it's no different than vacuuming out your house. But those that are honest will admit that abortion definitely kills something that's alive. And not only does abortion kill that something, it intentionally kills that something. So when we talk about what is abortion, we're not talking about killing in general, we're talking about the intentional killing of an innocent human being.
I need to, with all the boldness that the Holy Spirit will grant to me, tell everyone in this room that abortion is a murder. It is the murder of a human being. I'm going to have to say it. I'm going to show it to you in the Word. I want to prove it to you with science. I want to just lay it before you and say abortion is murder. And it's a holocaust like the world has yet to see. In fact, just to put it in perspective, Stalin was guilty of murdering 40 million of his own countrymen, Hitler 30 million human beings, and the United States, since Roe versus Wade, not globally, but the United States, has blown past both of those brothers and have made them look angelic as we have slaughtered wholesale 55 million little boys and little girls.
Millions of little boys and little girls. That is why this show has a threefold purpose. 1, save lives. 2, save souls through the preaching of the healing power of the gospel. And 3, equip believers to make a persuasive case for life. This is a matter of life and death. This is not a preference issue. What do we mean when we say something is wrong? For example, if I said to you, chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla, you would right away recognize that's a statement about me. It's subjective to me. You might like vanilla, or you might like strawberry. You would think it real odd if I said to you, chocolate is morally superior to vanilla. You would rightly think that guy's nuts. But what if I said the following? It's wrong to torture toddlers for fun. Now I'm no longer talking about what I like or prefer. I'm talking about what's right or wrong, regardless of my likes or dislikes. People think that when you claim abortion is wrong, you're saying you dislike it. But pro-lifers are not saying abortion is wrong because they dislike it. They're saying it's wrong because it intentionally kills an innocent human being. It's about what's right and wrong in spite of our tastes, not what's right and wrong according to our tastes. And that's the key point that people get so wrong. Imagine if I said to you, don't like slavery, don't own a slave. Or, don't like spousal abuse, don't beat your wife. In both cases, you would understand that I did not really grasp what was at stake with slavery and wife beating. That I was treating slavery and wife beating as mere preferences like ice cream. So when pro-lifers say abortion is wrong, they're not talking about their preferences, they're talking about what's right and wrong in spite of likes and dislikes. Pro-choicers are right. We should trust women to make their own personal decisions. We should keep government out of their private business. We should keep laws away from them that restrict their freedoms. I agree with pro-choicers completely if what? if the unborn are not human? If morally speaking, abortion is no different than clipping a fingernail, I see no reason to oppose it whatsoever. But if abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being, we have a problem.
And you're not going to want to miss it. It's a special series, airs on Tuesday nights on theDove TV at 8:30. All right, coming up next, what an honor to have with us Jonathan Sands. He is the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill. When we return.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Well, welcome back. What an honor for us today to have the co-author of a book that is just absolutely fascinating. Last week we had Wallace Henley with us, and today we have the co-author of the book, God Churchill, the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill, Jonathan Sands. And there's a picture of the book on the screen. Let me encourage you to get it out. It is put out by Tyndale. Pick it up at the stores. Fascinating read, and one that I think would be not only one of history, but one of inspiration, and also a book of warning. Jonathan, what an honor to have you, sir. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you very much indeed for having me on.
Oh, thank you. I have to tell you, I had a Churchill weekend. I spent 3 hours watching your mother's documentary, Chasing Churchill. I spent most of the weekend trying to get through the entire book. I'm up to chapter 12, which is dealing with Churchill and how he stayed calm and carried on. I'm just overwhelmed with it. It's just fascinating. And then to talk to you is kind of like the frosting on the cake.
Thank you very much. Actually, that's actually my Aunt Celia who wrote that book. Celia's written some brilliant books, Churchill Wanted, Dead or Alive, and indeed Chasing Churchill. She's quite a prolific writer, so I shall pass that information along. I'm sure she will be very pleased. But I'm pleased you had a Churchill weekend. Did you enjoy it?
Yes, and I have been warned that there's more to come.
There is indeed. Well, I'm very pleased that you enjoy the book.
Well, listen, now your life is talking about your great-granddad, is that right?
Yes, indeed. Well, it's very, very important to pass the legacy along. You know, if we don't actually know our history, then we are doomed to repeat it. And great-grandpa was very particular about passing on that sort of history. And you need to pass on the legacy of truth and do it with courage. And so that's basically what I'm doing at this moment in time.
All right. How did you and Wallace get connected?
We actually got connected through a mutual friend. We've known each other for just a little over a year and a half now. And a mutual friend said, you really need to meet Wallace Henley. He's a real fan of Winston Churchill, and he's been a theologian for over 30 years now, and you should get together with him. So we met up and we had lunch, and I told him about this vision of mine for what was originally going to be Churchill and God. And he was very, very interested in this. Anyway, we parted company, and then about a week later met up again and started talking about it again. And it became very, very clear to us that this was something that we should really be doing together. So, you know, despite the fact that he's 74 and I'm 40, you know, we formed a partnership which is really good and works really, really well.
That's wonderful. All right. So when did you begin to realize in your grandfather's life that there was a significant spiritual component?
In 2010, I've been a public speaker since 2005 and spoken about him since then. And everybody kept telling me, you need to have a book out on the market. And, I felt that it needed a book that would be justifiable to great-grandfather, something that would be honorable to him. And in thumbing through various books, I started coming across various times in great-grandpa's life when he really should have been killed. You know, things like the Battle of Omdurman and his escape from South Africa, and then, eventually the First World War. These were all events in his life that led me to the conclusion there was more to this story than met the eye. I just couldn't put my finger on. And then it was really God that very much inspired what eventually became God and Churchill.
All right. So this had a significant impact on your own faith journey, right?
Yes, it did. In 2010, when I started actually looking at this, I was as far away from God as possible. And it was purely and simply out of frustration that I really looked to heaven. And I said, go on, Lord, you tell me, what is the one aspect of my great-grandfather's life that has never been explored, never been written about? And, lo and behold, I found myself thumbing through this book, My Early Life. And as I said, I first of all came across the Battle of Omdurman, where he should have been killed in that battle. And then his escape from South Africa, and then his episode during the First World War, where he most definitely should have been killed by a bomb in the trenches. So it was all of that became a culmination of the foundation of the book that you have in your hands now.
And that resulted in your own commitment to God, because Wallace expresses his delight in having the opportunity to baptize you.
Yes, indeed. That certainly, in discovering that God was very much alive and working within my great-grandfather, it did very much bring me closer to God. It wasn't, I have to say, it wasn't an intentional thing at all. I wanted to write this book and everything, but it wasn't until I was sort of in the throes of the research that I realized that God very much does exist, and not only exists, but also works within people. And I looked back at my entire life and realized, I've been a failure throughout my entire life and right up to this point. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe God is preparing me for something. Maybe I've just been running away from this all of my life. And lo and behold, I then met, as soon as I accepted that, I met Wallace. We really started to sort of get on, and the research started to really flow when we formed that partnership. So it was a clear indication to me that God was there, and God wanted us to work together on this and get this going. So it was very much a God-centered thing.
The other part of that about this, Jonathan, is that in history you don't necessarily hear about the faith part of Sir Winston Churchill. You hear about his great ventures, you hear about his escape of death, you hear about him being a POW, you hear about his great speeches, but little do you know about the time when he became Admiral of the Navy and he turns to Deuteronomy 9, he goes over and writes about the Sermon on the Mount, and of course his nanny, Everest. You just don't hear about that in history.
No, it's certainly not something that is really spoken about. But what's more to the point, since great-grandpa's death in 1965, so many historians have written him off as an agnostic or an atheist. Well, our book goes to prove that cannot possibly be true. Churchill himself faith in God, both to Field Marshal Montgomery and indeed also to his close bodyguard, General Commander Walter Thompson. What he spoke of in public when he was guiding the people's hope towards God, what he spoke of in public, he certainly carried out in private as well. And so, one can separate that and say, well, this was not just political rhetoric. There's not just Churchill trying to curry favor or trying to curry support in any shape or form. He genuinely believed what he was talking about.
All right, he believed at the age of 16, he began to sense a divine appointment in his life. Explain that.
Yeah, he was talking to a friend of his, a gentleman called Merlin de Grasse Evans, and they were both at Harrow School, and this was 1891. And they were talking about their futures, and great-grandpa started speaking in a voice that really Merlin had not really appreciated at the time. And he started saying, London will be attacked, and I shall be in command of the defences of London, and it will fall to me to save the capital and save the empire. These were prophecies that he genuinely couldn't know about. For instance, in 1891, the closest that we had got to any sort of flight was a physicist called Samuel Langley, who had been flying his steam-powered aerodrome. But Churchill wouldn't necessarily have heard of that fact. He wouldn't have seen it. It wasn't widely reported in newspapers or anything like that. So how he would know that London would be attacked, or indeed indeed that at that time he would be called upon to become prime minister and to lead the forces of London, and then that he would lead the capital and the empire to a victory at the end of it. This is impossible that he could actually know that unless you consider divine intervention, unless you consider that as Churchill himself believed, a high power interfered in his life.
Therefore, he was a prophet, but he was tested, he challenged, he suffered. Those are normally not the tenets of a prophet.
I disagree. A prophet has to sometimes go into the wilderness. Moses himself escaped from Egypt and then had to go into the wilderness for those years before he could come back and face Pharaoh. So, it's prophets aren't always accepted, and certainly not in sort of their hometowns and things like that, as Jesus himself discovered when he preached in Nazareth. So, Churchill had to go through that trying time because at the end of the day, God needed to make sure that he was strong enough to be able to take on the burden that he was about to face. Because remember, in 1940, when great-grandpa became prime minister, it was completely hopeless. The situation was a foregone conclusion. Hitler was going to win. There was absolutely no human way that we could actually defeat him or fight the Nazis at all. Yet Churchill, for some reason, had a resilience that he wouldn't give up and he wouldn't surrender. And he was very right and very prophetic in his words that he spoke or that he wrote down and appeared in the first volume of the Second World War that he wrote, saying, "I felt as if I were walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial." That was very, very prophetic of him to actually see that his entire life, the trials and the rejection that he had faced as a childhood from his family, and then later on as a politician, from colleagues, political colleagues, friends and family, all of these things sort of built Churchill's mettle and made the man resilient to never surrender and never give up.
Beautifully said. He went looking for war. I mean, that was kind of interesting. He went to Cuba. He wanted to go on the battlefield. He went to India. He wanted to go on the battlefield. He's a journalist in South Africa. He goes to the battlefield. What was this all about?
Churchill wanted to make a name for himself. He had dreamed of going into politics at his father's side and in support, or rather in his father's support. So that all went away in 1895 when Randolph Churchill died. And so Churchill realized he had to make a name for himself. He attempted to stand to become a member of Parliament in 1899, but lost. And so he immediately posted himself as a war correspondent to South Africa, and so started covering that episode. He knew that he needed to make a name for himself so that he could go into politics. He didn't know why that was or what that draw was particularly, but when you look at the prediction, the prophecy he made at 16 years old, one realizes that it was to try and get that. He didn't seek war. He didn't seek glory. This was what he was misunderstood. He knew that he needed to make a name for himself, but it wasn't going to be on the bones of other people. He wasn't a glory hunter. He wasn't a warmonger, but he was just someone who was in a hurry to get somewhere.
All right, he's now being appointed head of the Navy. And he walks out and he sees the ships there in the harbor and looking north towards the Black Sea. But he comes back in his room and grabs the Bible and it opens to Deuteronomy 9. Explain that to our viewers and listeners.
Well, he found Sir Martin Gilbert, who was my great-grandfather's official biographer after his son Randolph died. I spoke to him about this in 2010, and I said this was the project that I was working on. And he said there is a lot of information out there. You should really go and get it. he told me that great-grandpa had read the Bible 16 times in his lifetime. It was the one book that sat by his bedside table, and he literally consumed it. And he had quite a photographic memory, and so would remember a lot of the tracts from it that he would then use in his speeches, and he would change them around to make them appropriate for the actual setting itself. So Churchill found great strength from those words. Deuteronomy 9 was merely another one of those particular episodes that Churchill just found as great strengths.
Talk about the time he was sending the ships into Turkey, and of course they lost a couple and they lost a lot of people, and he wanted to keep going, but the Prime Minister held him back.
Churchill had come up with this plan of how to end the First World War a lot quicker than it was actually going to be ending. And that was to attack through the Gallipoli Peninsula. And the only problem was, we mentioned in the book that actually the terrain itself would have been impossible, no matter how good a commander anyone had been. They were never going to get through because the terrain had been completely mapped incorrectly from what they were looking at. But Churchill himself asked originally to have 5,000 troops to accompany the Navy to be able to do a ground force landing. And Herbert Kitchener, who was currently Minister of War at that time, refused to give Churchill the support that he required. And this actually was based on an old-time grudge that Kitchener had on Churchill since the days of the River War, since the latter part of the 1800s. And so Kitchener refused to give him anything. And the War Cabinet kept discussing this and discussing it. And eventually Kitchener decided, okay, fine, no problem at all. I will send you with half the amount of troops that you've requested. So Churchill immediately went out and went forward with his original plan. The trouble was that such prevarication had gone forward that the Turks now knew exactly what we were planning, and they were ready for us. Churchill himself was blamed for the entire disaster. And when he begged the Prime Minister to allow him to draw on the cabinet papers that would have vindicated him and would have shown that he wasn't in total to blame for this, that there were in fact others making the decision, he was refused that ability. And honourably, he then resigned as First Lord of the Admiralty, and he sought a posting on the French front in the trenches, where he would go out with troops who basically had lost a lot of friends in that Gallipoli disaster. So he had quite a lot of courage actually doing that.
Do you believe that in your research for this book, Jonathan, that his military intuition was divine?
I do believe that there were certain things that certainly were divine guidance and things like that. Do I think that every single decision that he made was divine? I can't answer that. We don't have the evidence. One of the things that I said to Wallace very clearly at the start was that this book has to be based completely and utterly on evidence. It cannot be based on sort of circumstantial evidence or anything like that. It has to be the facts, because I didn't want someone to come along and pull it apart. And so, I can't answer for anything beyond what is in the book at this moment in time. I cannot say that every single strategy he had was divine inspiration. But what I can say is that if you look at things like Dunkirk and things like that, you actually see that there were certain things in there that you can't really explain unless you actually apply God's hand to it. When they were trying to escape the beaches and things like that, the Germans could have come in and they could have bombed and bombed and bombed and bombed, and they didn't. And as a result, 300,000 people got off that beach, which really shouldn't have been able to happen. Now, if that's not a miracle in and of itself, I don't know what is.
Very well said. All right, let me take a quick break. We'll be back with Jonathan Sands. He is the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill. The book is a must-read. It's not only history, it's inspiring, and yet it's a book of warning. It's called God and Churchill, How the Great Leader's Sense of Divine Destiny Changed His Troubled World and Offers Hope for Ours. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, theDove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Welcome back. Our very special guest today is the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill, Jonathan Sands. He's co-authored a book with our good friend Wallace Henley entitled God and Churchill. And I tell you, this is a must-read. I suggested earlier this might make a great gift for your pastor. October is Pastor's Appreciation Month. You may want to get this and give it to your pastor. Not only will it be great history, but inspiring, encouraging, and yet there's some warning in the book. Jonathan, again, thank you for your time. What an honor. Your great-grandfather often used the term Christian civilization and Christian ethics in his speeches. And it became more pronounced towards the end of his life. But tell us what you discovered he meant by that.
Well, first of all, when Churchill was actually speaking of Christian civilization, he wasn't just highlighting Christians at all. He was talking about a civilization. It's recognized around the world, around the civilized world, that we each hold dear to our hearts things like the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, and things like that. So Churchill was talking about a set of values that we follow as Christians. And there was a recognition, a clear recognition, that with Christian civilization you had freedom. You had the laws of the Ten Commandments that you followed. There were moral laws, but you had a lot of freedom. You could decide what you wanted to do. Whereas with Nazism and communism and things like that, they were all ways of life that put you into a box and that kept you there and refused to allow you to make those free decisions. So it was really the difference between free will and light and darkness, really.
Understood that term. Today they would probably look at it differently, don't you think?
Sorry, they'd look at Christian civilization.
Yeah, right. I mean, you refer to it as a moral ethic, and I think that was more understood there than it is now. Today, it's challenged.
Yes, I think there is quite a disconnect. There is a misunderstanding of what of ethics today. But Great Grandpapa was very particular and highlighted the Sermon on the Mount as the last word in ethics, and suggested that the closer we followed it, the more likely we are to succeed in our endeavors. Now, agnostic, atheist, Christian alike, whatever, you can deny this fact, but if you look at it, it is pretty obvious that it is that this is exactly what Christian civilization should be. It should be the freedom to be able to choose. Yes, indeed, the freedom to question. But in a world where we've become politically correct and things like that, all of that water has become very muddied.
Right. How did it impact you when you began to discover the writings of your grandfather, your great-grandfather, about the Sermon on the Mount? Because you don't hear about that much in history.
No, you really don't. It's not very fashionable to sort of discuss Christianity these days. It's not sort of the done thing, And so it's amazed me that so many people have missed the absolute obvious when it comes to Churchill. We've talked about this great hero, this amazing man who he faced challenge after challenge after challenge, and yet nobody has asked the question, how? How did he overcome this? What was it that actually did this? And if you look at Churchill's life as a whole, then you see there is absolutely no way he could have survived without the influence of without an outside influence, and that influence had to be God. So it's very, very obvious from looking at that. I have merely highlighted 3 stories that convinced me there was more to the story than met the eye, but I encourage anyone who actually reads God and Churchill to then take it further and to pick up Martin Gilbert's book, Churchill, A Life. And then you can see exactly what we're talking about in God and Churchill, that, there is a lot more to this story than meets the eye.
The book is a book of hope for our times, and yet it talks about some incredible parallels of your great-grandfather's times and where we are today. I don't know which one you want to tackle first, but when I got through the portion of the book that deals with the parallels, I was stunned. I'm still trying to process it. In fact, I probably will go back and reread it. There's ever a warning and yet a hope, it's in your book. You want to elaborate?
Well, thank you. Yes. Well, first of all, to deal with the warning. The warning is very real. It's been there. I mean, great-grandpa spoke in 1946 on the 5th of March. He gave his famous Iron Curtain speech, warning about the Russians, warning about what became the Cold War. However, that warning did not come to an end. Yes, the Cold War came to an end and all the rest of it, although one would say that relations with Russia today are rather chilly. And so, you know, one takes a look at what we're doing today in politics and how does it relate? Wallace and I firmly believe that we are in the year 1938 at this moment in time, purely and simply because there is a deal on the table at the moment with countries like Iran, well, particularly with Iran, that is going to be signed into law on November the 24th. It is an agreement that gives them the right to basically build nuclear weapons. And, you know, this is something we need to actually look at. Great-grandpa was devastated when we used the atom bomb, because he said that for the first time in our lives, we actually have in our hands the ability to annihilate ourselves. And that is a very serious warning that if you place nuclear weapons or the ability to build nuclear weapons in the hands of countries that the leadership doesn't care about their people in any shape or form, so they don't care about retribution, then you are asking for a war situation that, as in with Hitler and with Baldwin, could have been avoided had the Prime Minister sat up at the time and paid attention. We can avoid any further conflict if we as a people actually sit up and do something about it. But we're about to, you know, President Obama is about to be the equivalent of Stanley Baldwin. You know, Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain combined, because he's signing this agreement with Iran, knowing full well what the consequences could well be, and still signing it while denying the fact to himself and saying, well, no, I'm sure that Iran they won't build a nuclear bomb, and no, they're going to be fine, and they'll inspect their weapons quite comfortably. You know, I mean, it wasn't long ago that we didn't really trust Saddam Hussein. So why are we now going to trust Iran to do this? So this is the warning. We need to pay attention. We need to actually look at what is about to be signed, and we need to do something about it. We need to write to our congressmen, to our senators. I need to write to my member of parliament in London. We need to actually stop this agreement from being signed, because it can only end in one way, and that would be, sadly, a nuclear war. The hope that God and Churchill brings is a hope that God will raise someone up. If you look at the past, if you look at the devastations that we have faced in our time, God has always raised someone up. And he's always raised someone up to actually help us or help a situation move forward. People like Julius Caesar were raised up. They weren't godly people. They weren't religious people in any shape or form from that point of view. But God works within other leaders throughout the world. Winston Churchill was just one of those leaders that God decided, I'm going to work through Churchill, and I'm going to raise him up, and he is going to move things along. So our hope in this is that God is in charge. He worked in Churchill's life. He worked throughout the Second World War. That's what God and Churchill proves. If that is the case, then it is very probable that he is still working in our individual lives today, and indeed in the world today.
Wow. We saw it in our lifetime with Reagan and Thatcher. You know, I mean, two leaders that came at the right time. But we're at a critical mass, Jonathan. As you said, we're going to sign this thing with Iran. We're right in the middle of a presidential election. I know this isn't a fair question, but has anybody got Churchill characteristics on the horizon from your viewpoint?
I'm afraid that that is something I cannot answer. I can't say straight up that one candidate has that or not. All I can say is that they need, if they want to be good leaders, okay, they need to be selfless leaders. They need to be humble leaders like my great-grandfather, okay? They need to lead with courage, even though, you know, many people may say, no, this is the wrong way to go. They've got to have the courage to stand up for what they believe in. They've got to have the faith to believe that they are the best person for the job and they really can clear up the mess that we have been left with. And, you know, they've got to have the faith to believe that they can clear up this mess, that this mess can actually be cleared up. And then thirdly, they need the integrity to actually stand on what they have said and stand on that principle. And no matter what, stand and say, we're going to do it. We are never going to surrender. We are never going to give in. But it's going to take a special kind of leader to do that. You're not looking for a president who's going to dominate. You're looking for a president who wants to serve and cannot be bought. You know, we need to get rid of the corruption. I'm fed up of seeing the corruption throughout, you know, politicians in this country, in my country, and throughout the world. You know, politicians, they get there, they rise to power, and instead of taking the opportunity, as Churchill did, to genuinely serve people, a lot of them take the opportunity to take from people and disregard the people that they're meant to be serving. So the next president of the United States has to be a person who is of humility. They may not be a religious leader in any shape or form. They may not have any sort of religion, but they need to be humble. And they need to be prepared to humble themselves, not only before God, but before man, and serve the people properly.
Wow. I can't add a thing to that. Let me take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll finish our time together with Jonathan Sands. He's the co-author of an incredible book, God and Churchill. He's the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill. Let me encourage you, this would make a great gift for the holiday season, make a great gift for your pastor. You yourself will love it. Get a copy of it. It's put out by Tyndale. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. You know, compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Hey, welcome back, and what an honor today to have with us Jonathan Sands. He is the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill. He's hooked up with our good friend Wallace Henley, and they have co-authored a book entitled God and Churchill, How the Great Leader's Sense of Divine Destiny Changed His Troubled World and Offers Hope for Ours. And I would encourage you to get a copy of this book. Absolutely fascinating. Jonathan, again, before I run out of time, thank you for your time, and hopefully we can connect again and often. I really enjoy having you. Let me ask you this. It appeared that your great-grandfather, wanted to make a name for himself for the sole purpose of getting elected, for the sole purpose of fulfilling his divine purpose, and then kind of quietly step off the stage. Does that summarize it?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I mean, he served the purpose for which he had been born. He brought the world to, he saved the world from the Nazis and from Hitler, from that terrible evil. And so that was his sole purpose in life. And, that once completed, yes, he stepped away from the scene. I don't think he voluntarily stepped away from the scene. If you recall, he lost the 1945 election. But actually, we in the family feel that was actually quite a blessing. And as my great-grandmother said, it really could be a blessing in disguise. And great-grandpapa looked at her and said, yes, it's a very good disguise. So, he wasn't necessarily willingly stepping off the stage, but the time had really come when he needed to do that. And then this became more relevant in the 50s when he actually returned as prime minister, and then he resigned in 1953, allowing Eden the chance to actually find his feet. It was the right time. It was time for him to step away. He had fulfilled the purpose.
He was offered great recognition and awards, and he just really didn't want all that.
No, great-grandpapa maintained that he hadn't done anything at all. He maintained that it was the heart of the lion was the people and the nations around the world that had fought against Hitler. He merely had been privileged enough to be the roar of the lion and to sometimes direct the lion on where to use its claws. So, he felt, even at the end of his life, he said, he actually said, as part of his last words were, "I've done so much to achieve so little." And he honestly believed that he hadn't achieved anything. And actually, the interesting story of how he wanted to die, Mr. Winston Churchill, and King George wanted to give him, obviously, the Order of the Garter. And at the end of the war, he said, well, how can I possibly accept the Order of the Garter from the king when I have just received the Order of the Boot from his people? And so he refused to accept the honour. And it wasn't until 1953 when Her Majesty the Queen made a personal phone call to great-grandpapa at number 10 and said to him, "Winston, if you don't come to Buckingham Palace to accept the Order of from me, then I'm going to come to number 10 Downing Street and I'm going to bestow it upon you there." Great-grandpapa was a man of great honour and knew that that would be very degrading for Her Majesty to come cap in hand to him. So he, assured her, "I will be immediately," and went over to Buckingham Palace and accepted it. And, he was really, really honoured that she had insisted. But Churchill himself didn't want to receive honours.
Wow. Well, Jonathan, as you pursued to write this book, your own faith came into focus, and a commitment that has obviously impacted your life in a great way. And then you finished writing the book, you and Wallace. Was there anything surprising in your endeavors and in your research and discovery? Anything kind of just catch you by surprise that you didn't know?
Actually, yes. Something which really confirmed to both Wallace and I that Churchill actually had a prophecy in a common law garden prediction about his life. We actually discovered that Hitler himself had a prophecy that he had also at the age of 16 years old. And this was in 1905. And this was recorded by his friend, August Kubizek. And they'd just gone to see one of Wagner's 5-part operas called Rienzi. And Hitler came out of there, his hands thrust in the pockets of his coat. And Kubizek recalled that his voice completely and utterly changed from the friend that he had known and became what would later be recognized as the Führer of Germany. And so he started talking about this mission that he was being given, that, one day he would save Germany and everything, save them from destruction. And in discovering this, I have to say that I burst into tears because I realized that if Hitler, instead of pursuing a path of war, had sought a path of peace, as great-grandpapa had, then he could have had all the accolades that my great-grandfather has today, all of that glory and that recognition that has been so kindly bestowed upon my great-grandfather since 1945, could well have been Hitler's, if only he had pursued peace and not pursued war. And the most devastating thing about it is, if he had done that, 60 million lives could have been saved. And, World War I would have been the only war that we referred to. And Churchill himself would have disappeared into obscurity. So, it's such a devastating thing to discover that. But we were thrilled to see that the confirmation that when you have a prophecy, you have a choice. You can either go down path A or path B. And the path you choose will determine how that prophecy unfolds. Hitler had the choice of pursuing peace and seeking arrangements and friendships with other European nations. but instead he chose to be a conqueror, and he chose to fight and to kill millions and millions of people for no reason whatsoever. So that was the most exciting thing that we discovered in the book.
You know, that describes what you said earlier before the break, and that was the difference between pride and humility.
Yes, very much so indeed. Churchill was very much a man of humility. Hitler himself, Churchill would point the people's hope towards God. He recognized that, as he said in one of his speeches, in God's good time, we will be liberated. Okay, but Hitler himself turned the German people to point towards him as their hope. You know, I am your hope for this Reich. I'm going to make it last. You know, it'll be 1,000 years. I'm going to save you. I am. You know, he said to Martin Bormann once in a private conversation. He said, "What Jesus was unable to complete, I, Adolf Hitler, will finish." You know, he dared to equal himself to Christ. And that was absolutely disgusting. Whereas Churchill himself had no wish, and actually expressed on one occasion, he said, I have no wish ever to take God's job. You know, he really didn't want to be God. And so he was quite happy, you know, promoting the faith that was the right faith.
All right, the book is entitled God and Churchill, and again, it's put out by Tyndale. Let me encourage you to get a copy of it. There's a picture there on the screen. Would make an excellent gift. Jonathan, I got about 3.5 minutes left. What do you want us to get from this book? What do you want as co-author for us to be the takeaway?
I want it to be a book of hope, as written on the front cover. The fact I want you to take away from it that if God intervened in Winston Churchill's life, and he'd intervened at points during the Second World War, then I want you to know and believe that it is entirely possible that God is working in our individual lives today, and indeed in this world. And though things may look terrible at this moment in time, God is in control.
Into that. What's next for you? I mean, this obviously has inspired you and probably changed your message about your grandpa, your great-grandpa. What's next for you?
Well, I'm looking forward to dragging my 74-year-old co-author throughout America and indeed the world and talking about the book. We're actually going to be working on a second book together at the moment, and we're working on the research for that, which is going to be on Churchill's leadership. And we're planning on calling it Lead Like Churchill, Courage, Faith and Integrity. So we've got some exciting things going, but now that I've got Wallace, I have no intention of letting him go. It's been a great partnership, so we're going to continue that.
I know he's equally thrilled, and you know, he actually said to me in our interview and time together, he felt like his life has come to this point for this purpose, meeting you and extending this message of not only hope, but what genuine leadership is really all about. What would you say to the faith community in America about where we are in history and what we could do about it?
Pay attention. Wake up and pay attention. Have a look and see what's happening today in politics. Be aware of the threat that is happening in November, because Iran has stated very clearly that as soon as they get nuclear weapons, their first hit is going to be Israel. If you hit Israel, that means World War III, because there are agreements with the United States, there are agreements with Europe. You know, pay attention, wake up, start praying now. Start asking God right now, please intervene. This is one of those 1938 moments, okay, when we are on the brink of war and there is something that we could do, but there's nothing we can do to reverse it. We have to pray and we have to ask God, please show us that hope, be present, raise up a leader who will take us through.
Thank you, Jonathan. You're an inspiration, my friend. And I look forward to having you back. Keep up the good work, and keep dragging Wallace everywhere you can drag him.
I really do. Bless you. Hopefully at some stage we'll be on with your show together. So that'll be great. Thank you.
The book is entitled God and Churchill. Get a copy of it, put out by Tyndale. I'm sure it's available at the stores. Check it out at Evangel, and also check it out on Amazon online and Barnes & Noble. It's a great read. It's an inspiring read. And we'll see you next time on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Jim, and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.